Hello, everyone, and welcome to Randstad RiseSmart's Career Podcast, helping you transform your everyday work life into an exciting and rewarding career. I'm your host, Kimberly Schneiderman. With 10 plus years experience in coaching, writing, and training, I'm passionate about delivering ideas, insights, tools, and resources to people like you, people focused on achieving their career goals. Together, we'll explore how you can identify your career passions, set your career goals, and achieve everything you work toward in your career. Our experts are career industry practitioners with deep experience in HR and corporate leadership. They are seasoned coaches in the area of career growth, workplace communications, succeeding in a current role, enhancing work satisfaction, managing priorities and stressors, building a personal brand, and strengthening valuable internal networks. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to this podcast and share it with your colleagues. You can also follow me at KJ Schneiderman on Twitter or on YouTube on the RiseSmart Career channel. Better yet, sign up for coaching services on the Randstad RiseSmart portal so that you can benefit from everything we talk about. Now, on with the show. Welcome, everyone. Today's episode, Understanding People's Styles to Communicate Better in the Workplace, is centered around communication and understanding of others. Specifically, we're discussing elements of personality that make us be the person that takes action versus analyzing information, or makes us be that life of the party versus the person that gets the work done for the party. These ideas come to us from what is known as the DISC assessment. Today, we're going to be using its teachings to help us succeed in communicating with others in our day-to-day work life. And our guest expert today is Greg Dillon. Greg is a senior manager in learning and development at Randstad USA, where he provides leadership coaching and training for internal leadership staff. He is also an ICF certified coach and has his own coaching and training company called Dillon Coaching and Training, coaching clients regarding their careers, leadership, public speaking, and general life goal achievements. He has a master's degree in training and development from Lesley University and over 28 years experience in leadership and development, coaching and sales, just a wide variety of experience. Greg has spoken all over the country on various topics relating to career transitions, leadership, and adult learning and training. Greg has been married to Catherine, the love of his life, for 35 years, which is an incredible feat in itself, Greg. Good for you guys. Greg has 3 daughters, 2 sons-in-laws, and 2 granddaughters who all live in the southeastern U.S. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. It's a delight to be with you today.
Thank you. Greg, can you get us started? We talked in the introduction about these styles, the person that takes action versus analyzes, the person that's the life of the party versus planning the party. Can you give our audience a little bit of a foundation of what we're talking about today?
Sure. So the idea, Kimberly, of there being 4 styles of behavior goes way, way back. I mean, I'm talking the Babylonians, 700 plus BC. They believed that people's behavior was driven by the elements, earth, wind, fire, water. The Greeks came along a couple hundred years later, felt like it had not to do with the elements, but it was internal to the individual. But they thought it had to do with fluids in their body, which they called humors. Some people out there might be even more familiar with that. Well, then you jump way, way forward to the early 1900s. Of course, before that, there was the birth of psychology. One of the very first behavioral psychologists who was primarily interested in normal behavior was a guy by the name of William Marston. And he knew, like we know now, that there's, infinite variety of behavioral style. But he was interested in this notion that there was 4 primary styles. Okay. And so that's where DISC comes from. And it's really just based on his research that people tend to be either task-oriented or people-oriented. Then you combine that with them either being active in their orientation or responsive in their orientation. And so that's where the styles come from. A high D is someone who's task-oriented and active. An I is someone who's people-oriented and active. An S is someone who's people-oriented and responsive. And a C is someone who's task oriented and responsive. And so that's where the 4 styles come from at a high level. Yeah.
And so which is better, the task or the people oriented people, or the active or the responsive?
Well, most of us are going to say that the one that's better is mine, right? On my
Yes.
own. But of course, there isn't any better. There isn't any right or wrong,
Okay.
any good or bad, better or anything. Every style has strengths and every style has weaknesses. Now, having said that there is no good or bad, better or best or anything, it is important to note that depending on the relational or task orientation thing that your interaction is about, if you and the other person have a similar style, you're going to find the communication to be much easier than if you're very, very different.
Gotcha. Okay. So I think people listening today would say that, well, the people that they work with are very different from what they are and have very different styles. So let's talk a little bit about understanding somebody else's style. What are the cues that we get for the different styles of people?
Well, I think the first thing to do is really to consider, is the person that I'm around. Now, the thing is, you need to be a little bit of a student of the person.
Okay.
You need to observe them and be asking yourself, does the person I'm observing seem to be task oriented because they seem to be all about getting things done and lists and the work itself, the task? Or do they seem more interested in people? Is it to them more, they're friendly, they're warm, they're all about the interaction and telling stories and all that? So that's the first thing to ask yourself. Does the person seem to be task or people oriented? Then once you kind of make an educated guess at that, let me back up and say one thing. The best way, the only foolproof way of really knowing is to have the other person take the DISC assessment.
Okay.
But in many situations, that's not going to be realistic, right?
No.
I mean, you're not going to say to a potential client or even a colleague at work, hey, could you take this DISC assessment? They're going to be like, what are you, stalking me on Facebook also, or what? So that would be weird. So what I'm talking about is beginning, and I say beginning because it's a lifelong thing you get better and better at. But even with that, you're never going to be able to make a foolproof guess at someone's style. Some people you will. Some people you'll say, oh yeah, I see the signs, I think they're people oriented. Other people you're like, I'm not sure, I see a little bit of task and people. But I do think the more you begin to make that guess, the better you get at it. So after the task people, then you ask yourself, does the person I'm observing seem more active? Meaning they're all about go, go, go. They seem to have a quick pace. They're about high level, whatever, and then move on. Or do they seem like their orientation is not so much jump in and take action, and then maybe ask for forgiveness later, which sometimes very active oriented people do. They're more responsive. So their first orientation is to step back, to observe, and to basically try to figure out how to respond to what's coming at them, right? So once you've made sort of those two assessments and guesses, then you're like, okay, I think the person is task oriented, which would be D or C, and then responsive, okay, which would be the C, not the D. Does that make sense?
It does. And so I determine that somebody is task oriented and very responsive. What does that look like then? And what do I do with that information?
Well, if someone was a high C, they were task oriented and very responsive. What they are primarily, the communication that they're going to be interacting with, or we could say the currency that they communicate with,
Okay.
right? It's the way they like to interact with people is about being accurate. It's about the task. So it's about what are we doing? And then because it's responsive, the C's tend to be very focused on the quality and the details. So that's what they're interested in. So if I'm an I, which would literally be the opposite of the C,
Okay.
because it's people oriented and active, I'm going to want to have all this interaction with them, which they're not interested in.
Right.
I'm going to want to talk very high level, and they're going to have a whole bunch of questions about, but wait, whoa. Don't just say 30,000 foot, thing. What do you specifically mean? What are you expecting from me? So that's where, the rub can come, so to speak, between the differences in people's styles.
And so if I'm speaking to, say, my manager or my leader, and they are that person that wants a lot of details and are very task oriented, no matter what my personality is, when I'm with that person, I need to plan to give them a lot of details, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that people can tend to feel like is that the other person needs to adapt to the way I am. But that's a huge mistake. We all know we can't change other people, right?
Right.
We may want them to change, but all I can really control is myself. And so if I am willing to adapt myself to that person's communication style, it's going to tend to be a lot more effective communication. Now, if we both are willing to adapt, that's ideal, but I can't expect the other person. We all know all kinds of situations where we're in where the other person is just sort of, this is who I am, so deal with it, right? And if we really want to have effective communication, we have to deal with it. So
great. So if I'm a people leader myself, and I'm thinking about the people that report to me, how important it is for me in terms of leadership strategy to adapt to them versus having them deliver what I need as a people leader. I keep going back to this idea of this task-oriented person that wants a lot of details. If I have several direct reports that are more people-oriented people and kind of go, how do I get them to do things that I want them to do?
Well, we're not talking about the deliverables, right? We're not talking about what has to get done. What we're talking about here in behavioral style is the way people tend to go about doing it.
Okay.
So it's not so much like if you're in a function where you need things to be done very exacting, then that's what the nature of that job is. So you can't say, well, I won't expect it of this person because they're an active, people-oriented person. They're not task and detail-oriented, right? No, if that's what the job is demanding, that's what has to be produced. But for me as a manager, if I know that I have people on my team that are very people-oriented and very active, and they're going to tend to miss details, I might need to coach them to take more time, purposely think about slowing down and paying really close attention. And if I had somebody on my team who was a high C, I probably wouldn't need to have that conversation with them because they're going to naturally have that tendency.
Gotcha. Okay.
And by the way, we're talking, one takeaway here is that we're talking very broad brush, right? I'm looking at all Ds as though they're all the same. They're not. All I's as though they're all the same. And we do that just so we can kind of get our arms around the differences between each style. But the reality is most all of us have a little bit of all four of the styles. And so there's nuances to this. Yeah.
So Greg, when I'm at work and I say, oh my gosh, that person is so difficult to deal with. Like, I can't believe I have to be on this project with that person.
Yep.
What's happening? And what can I do to help myself have success working with that person on a project?
You know, what you're talking about, Kimberly, is so common. Oftentimes at Randstad, people will choose to do a disc workshop with their team because they have a lot of different styles on their team and people are not getting along. And the thing is, if you don't have at least a framework and an understanding that there are different behavioral styles, we tend to look at people that are very different from us and we just think that person's an idiot. Right? I mean, that's how we tend to, that's our bias. We tend to look at people who are very different and just think they're an idiot, they're wrong. And so if I don't have any sort of framework in my mind or any sort of language that allows for differences in behavioral style, then my biases are going to overshadow our interactions. So if people can understand their own style, and that would be another takeaway, I think, is there's two parts to this. One is understanding your own style, your own tendencies, so that you can appropriately mitigate those depending on the situation. For example, I'm a high I, so I really like the people interaction. I can tend to talk a lot. If I'm around someone who's a high C, and they're the opposite.
Yeah.
I'm people-oriented and active. They're task-oriented and responsive. If I am just myself, they're going to tend to feel like I am unconcerned about the results or unconcerned about the quality, which may not at all be true. It's just I like to spend more time interacting, getting to know you. That's not important to them. So rather than them just thinking Greg's an idiot, he doesn't really care about the quality on this project, they can say, oh, okay, I understand. Greg is people-oriented more. I'm not. Or Greg is active. So he's going to want to, talk high level and I need the details. So I think just understanding that about each other, that would be the other takeaway besides understanding my own style, was allowing the differences between people to be a central framework in your mind so that you just don't go to the negative and assume, like I said earlier, that the person's an idiot. Right.
Can we claim these things out loud? Like when you and I got on the call today, could I have said, hey, Greg, I know that you tend to like to warm up and have a nice, friendly conversation, but we really need to dive in because we're on limited time for this podcast episode. Is that okay to claim that style, or what is the need of the moment?
Absolutely.
Right,
I'm a high I. My boss is a high D, but she's also I. So there are times, actually, we had a conversation yesterday where we spent an entire hour just talking about personal things. She knows I'm oriented that way. Now, she's also a high D. And there are times where we'll get on a call and she'll just get right into business. That's not normally the case. And she does a great job of really adapting. But I also have to adapt. So if I'm queuing off of her and she gets right into the task, I just have to go with that
and not take it personally. It sounds like,
personally. Yeah, not think she doesn't care about me, because I know that's not true.
Gotcha. That's good. That's good. All right. So this is good information when we are one-on-one with somebody, understanding their style. What if it's a mixed group? Or what if we simply don't know that reader and listener? You're jumping into perhaps a sales meeting or some other meeting where we don't have the luxury of an introduction or time to get to know someone. How do we handle that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not easy, first of all. Obviously, if everyone were the same style, it'd be easier, right?
Yeah.
Now, I would encourage you, for example, if it's a bunch of salespeople are often, not always, are often active types.
Okay.
So they're often high D, high I types because those are make it happen personality types, right?
Okay.
So salespeople are often high Ds or high Is. If I'm speaking to the finance department, they're often going to be high Cs. You want people who are highly attentive to detail to be in those kinds of roles.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
Yep. You don't want to be like, hey, my paycheck is not right. And they're like, oh, don't worry about it. It's close enough. No, that's not going to work.
It's not.
But yeah, if I am speaking to a group of people and I have had no ability to get a sense of what their style is, communicate in your own style, right? Be yourself.
Okay.
But try to tune into, do they seem to be moving along quickly and want to talk at a high level? If then you're just thinking, okay, this is an active group, or these are the active type people. And then here are the more responsive type people, or here's the people-oriented people who tend to make jokes and, all that versus the task-oriented people who just want to kind of stick to the agenda. And then you can throw in some things here and there that will cater to each of the styles. For example, if you were giving a presentation, I would want to make sure there was an executive summary up front. That would appeal to the high Ds, right? I'm going to get right to the point. I'm going to tell you where we're going and what's expected at a high level. I would want to throw in some stuff for the high Is. So I would want to make sure I do maybe I do a brief icebreaker. I make sure my visuals are colorful, that sort of stuff. I make it interesting. My high S's, I might ask some really thought-provoking questions and make sure I give them time to process that.
Okay.
And encourage them to try to come out with that, because S's will often sit in the background and be quiet, but they often have some of the most profound input, which often goes unheard because they have to be coaxed out a lot, often. And then the high C's, make sure I have an appendix where I can get into detail that I may not get into in the regular presentation. Does that make sense? All that kind of trying to incorporate all that.
That's really interesting. And I like that strategy of thinking about the various types of personalities that might be in a presentation or in a group that you're presenting to or speaking to, and trying to include tidbits of things that each group might appreciate or connect with. Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you.
Sure.
So you said something that it kind of caught my attention. You talked about the people that are S's, and how they are often quiet and have profound things to say, or examples to give, or ideas, etc. How does these ideas of these styles fit into the personality of introvert versus extrovert?
Well, that's a great question. And we could say in a general sense that the active types, the D and the I, would tend to be more extroverted.
Okay.
And the S and the C would tend to be more introverted. The thing is, in the creation of DISC, Marston didn't really he didn't use that language, introvert, extrovert. I know a lot of times people will use the Myers-Briggs type indicator, MBTI, and they'll try to make a similar comparison.
Okay.
Because, of course, Myers-Briggs does talk about introvert, extrovert. But I don't usually go there with that. We could even say, in some sense, that I's and S's are extrovert because they're people-oriented. So some of that gets into what do we mean by extrovert, introvert. So DISC doesn't really use that terminology. We could certainly say I's tend to be extroverted.
Gotcha.
Because they're people-oriented and active. But I don't usually use that terminology when I'm talking about DISC, just because Marston didn't frame it that way.
Gotcha. Yeah. So we talked about, at the very beginning, you said that when two people of similar personalities or similar styles are speaking, that communication is probably really easy between those two people. Does that mean when I'm hiring somebody new for my team, I should look to hire somebody that is like me?
Well, at Randstad, at least, we do not use DISC as a hiring criteria.
Okay.
I think there even can be potentially legal ramifications of people being discriminated against because of something that is separate from their qualifications for a job.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
But also there's too many other variables. Like, we're just talking broad brush here, DISC. We're not talking about the nuances. And DISC doesn't address stuff like experience, skill, that sort of stuff. I do see a lot of times, I remember several years ago speaking with a leader at Randstad who basically, if you looked at her team, it was like cookie cutter. She tended to only hire people that were just like her. Now, in some sense, it was easy for her to communicate with them. They got a lot of certain things done. They were all like high I people. But they also, I wouldn't be surprised if they had other issues that, because they didn't have high S's and C's on their team, details were missed.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So depending on the function of the job, you want to think about what all is needed, right? I know it's a high calling for a leader to hire people, or to have people on their team, let me put it that way, who are a little bit of all of the styles. It's harder for them as a leader, but you are able then to enjoy the strengths of each of the styles in what they bring to the table, depending on the function of the department or roles.
Gotcha. Okay. Greg, let's have a moment of summary. So if we could revisit the four styles and how they go together one more time, and what each style might look like in the workplace.
Okay. So, DISC is the acronym that is the first letter that starts with each of those words, and the word itself will depend on the provider that does the DISC instrument.
Okay.
We use a company by the name of Triaxia. So for D's, they call dominant. So that's an active-oriented and task-oriented person. Again, we're talking broad brush.
Broad brush. And broad brush, what does that look like in the workplace for somebody to be a high D?
They are going to tend to be getter done, right? I'm all about the task and I'm going to get it done. And sometimes when someone is really high D, the people around them look at that word dominant and think, yep, makes sense. They're trying to dominate me. They're not trying to dominate you because they're not people oriented. The problem can be they are going to get their task done and you might be in the way. So they have to either work around you, work through you, or move you out of the way. But by golly, they're getting the task done.
That's interesting. All right. So the next one then, I think it's I.
Yep. The high I is going to be also active. So they too are going to be go, 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 but they're people oriented. So you made the comment earlier about being life of the party. Often kind of stereotypically, we think of I's as the life of the party. They love to interact with people. They love to talk, be humorous, tell stories. They just enjoy the interaction. So oftentimes they're great salespeople. They are great presenters because they like the getting up in front of people and all of that.
Gotcha.
So influence is the word that Triaxia uses for the high I, influence. And you can see why. The people oriented and the active. Yeah.
And you gave a little bit of what might be perceived as negative interactions with a high D. What might somebody perceive as negative from a high I?
They are all about how they're perceived. They can be perceived as shallow. These are just people who want all the attention and they dominate the conversation. They can be perceived that way.
Gotcha. All right. What's the next letter in the rotation?
The S for Triaxia is the word steady. They too are people oriented like the I is, but they're not active. They're responsive. So they're going to tend to come across warm, friendly, low key. They're great listeners instead of talkers. They are often the people in a setting that other people will gravitate towards and share things with because they're great listeners and they come across very sincere. They're patient, even keel. Now, they also can be perceived as being resistant to change and don't often come out forthright with what they think, even though it could really benefit. They don't like being the life of the party or up in front, so they tend to like to be in the background.
Thank you. And then the last one, C, I believe.
Yeah, C is for Triaxia. The word is conscientious. So they too are responsive like the S, but they're not people oriented, they're task oriented. So for them, it's about the task and it's about getting it right. Now, for them, they get security from things being done right, following the right procedures. It makes us safe. It keeps us protected, right? And so these are people who are just super great with details. And I always say for them, there's a place for everything and everything should be in its place.
That's good. That's good. All right. So Greg, you and I have been on this call for 30 minutes or so since we started, and you and I have had other interactions in our work life. I want to know how you've pegged me.
I think you are, and I'm interested to hear what you really are. I think you're a high I. You definitely seem people oriented, but I also sense a high D in there. I don't know that it's your highest. I think you tend to be more people than task, but I do think you're also about getting stuff done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So. Tell me.
I think you have me pegged correctly. I like to get things done. I like to work with people. I think working with a podcast is definitely all about working with people.
Yep.
So I think you've pegged me well. You obviously have a good deal of experience with this topic. It's great.
Thanks. Yeah.
So Greg, thank you for this information today. I feel like I have a good grasp of what I need to pay attention to different people's styles and kind of tune in to what they might need during our communications with each other and how I might want to start communicating with other people. So I thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I have just one question that I ask all of my podcast guests. What is a book that you are recommending right now and why?
I'm a big reader, so there's always a whole bunch of books that I would recommend. One book I really love, which I'm excited about, is called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. It's not a brand new book. It's been around for, I don't know, maybe 10 years. But Charles Duhigg has partnered with a company by the name of Crucial Learning, who puts out the material on crucial conversations, crucial accountability, and his material fits nicely with their suite of things. And I've been through the training, and I'm looking now to get certified and begin to deliver the training on the topic. But the concepts are fascinating to me. I'm kind of a student of, as you could imagine, on human behavior, because it has so much to do with coaching, training. And so this idea of habits, and we've probably heard before, first a person makes a habit, then the habit makes the person.
Gotcha.
And in a sense, we're all a result of the habits that we have cultivated up to this point in our life. And so I am fascinated, and I think other people would be too, by just really looking at, how do I engineer my habits? If I want a different outcome, how can I tweak this cycle of how habits happen and end up with a different result in some areas than I maybe currently am getting? So.
That's great. You're making me want to read that book. Thank you. And I've heard Charles Duhigg on a couple of podcasts that I like to listen to. Mm-hmm. And I know that one of them, I actually printed out the transcript for the podcast and tried to pull out some ideas and such and really pay attention to what he has to say. So definitely, I'm going to go back and read that book. Thank you for suggesting it.
Sure. You're welcome.
All right.
You'll like it.
Thank you. Thank you to Greg for helping us understand the components of personalities and how to use that understanding in our day-to-day work life. If you would like to learn more or connect with Greg, you can find him on LinkedIn at Greg Dillon 1 or on his website at Dillon Coaching and Training, which is DCANDT.com. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and I look forward to our next episode.
Thank you for having me, Kimberly. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Randstad RiseSmart Career Podcast, helping you transform your everyday work life into an exciting and rewarding career. I thank our expert today and encourage you to tune in for our next episode, where we continue talking about how you can identify your career passions, set your career goals, and achieve everything you want to work toward in your career. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to this podcast and share it with your colleagues. You can also follow me at KJ Schneiderman, that's KJSCHNEIDERMAN, on Twitter or on YouTube on the RiseSmart Career channel. You can also sign up for coaching services in the Randstad RiseSmart portal so you can directly benefit from everything we talk about.